What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here with another draft breakdown look at a player that the Detroit Lions selected. And today, we are moving to the linebacker position with Jack Campbell. So let's get it started.
It's been a childhood dream to be in the NFL, and I couldn't be any more happier to have the opportunity to represent Detroit and be a part of something special that I feel like I've been here for the day, and I can already tell it's truly unique, and it's something that I feel like is the fans are definitely going to be excited about. So,
welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we're back with another one of these draft videos. Now, once you get to the linebacker position, specifically the defensive side of the ball, I think you start to talk a lot about scheme, and this is something that we're absolutely going to revisit multiple times, I'm sure, during the offseason, heading into the season. So this is something that I really want to revisit, specifically with this draft pick, how he may fit into this defense. I definitely want to do that with Rad as well, because after this draft pick that night, I remember him texting me and saying, man, I think he's going to probably play this position, and then Alex Anzalone will go here, because, you know, we have Malcolm Rodriguez, and I know we both like Malcolm Rodriguez a lot, and he played well last season. So this is one of those draft picks that's definitely going to be revisited by me, probably with Rad. I definitely want to do something with Rad there, but multiple times in terms of what we view that he could do in this defense and how that's going to affect other players currently on this roster. But with that being said, for this video, I wanted to get that out there. I've been just, you know, kind of stewing on it, thinking about it a lot these last few days, just watching back with the Rams and the Saints and trying to pinpoint what exactly I think his fit could be with this defense, how the Lions have drafted that position, how they adapted their defense. Like, you guys don't understand how crazy it's been in my head. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on the player, talk about the player, and we'll absolutely revisit this, because the player side was actually the easy part. I mean, it was really easy to watch him and like almost everything, every trait about the player. Like, there wasn't really any bad grades that I gave. I told you guys when we did Jahmyr Gibbs, like there was an area where I felt like, you know, it was adequate. And with that, for Jack Campbell, I don't even know if I have a grade like that across the board in any of his traits. Actually, I have one, so we'll get to that. Everything was either good or I really liked it. This is an exciting draft pick. It's also kind of a rare breed, not just for this year's draft. That's something that I hit on after the draft, right? You're going linebacker at 18. People are like, man, what are you doing, off-ball linebacker? For me, you know, I said I missed it. Look, I didn't think the Lions would go with a linebacker high, but I thought they may wait a long time because I like their linebackers. But if you do look at this position group, specifically for this year's draft, if you wanted a guy that could play the kind of role that Jack Campbell could play, whether that be a Mike linebacker, or that be a Sam linebacker, if you want a guy like that, then man, there wasn't many guys built like this in general. Like, forget the athleticism side for a second. There wasn't many guys that were 6'4.5", 249. That was just not there in this year's draft. Like I said, the only guy that like similarly kind of came to mind in terms of build would be like a Noah Sewell, but Sewell's not the athlete that this guy is. And then you start to look at these testing numbers and you're just comparing him to previous draft picks and guys along the draft class, and you're like, dang, man, he's like knocking everybody out. These guys that are 230 pounds, he's still got better scores in certain categories. So this is a very unique player, not just to the draft, but I think also in the NFL. He reminded me of Logan Wilson immediately when I was watching him. That name just kept popping in my head, Logan Wilson from Cincinnati. I was like, man, that's the one guy that I can think of. And I'm really bad with comps because previous drafts like that, I didn't focus on them like I do now. So I'm pretty bad with comps, but he was the guy that just came to mind to me a lot, was Logan Wilson. Very unique player here. So we're going to start off with who the heck is Jack Campbell. Just like we asked about Gibbs, who in the world is Jack Campbell? Well, if you don't know, he's a linebacker, so we'll start with that. But as I said, he's kind of a freak show in terms of a build, man. You're basically talking about 6'4.5", 250 pounds, 22 years old, two-time team captain. You just can run through the awards that he has. 2019, 11 games, 2025 games. But then you get to 2021, you're talking about a team captain. You're talking about voted the MVP of the defense for Iowa. You go to 2022, this past season, he was the Butkus Award winner for the best linebacker in college football. He was also an all-academic player 3 times with Iowa. So you just start to get some of the accolades. He's got tons of accolades. You get to the statistics side, which we'll get to in a second. But I want to start with these athletic scores that he posted at the Combine/Pro Day. I'm pretty sure all these numbers are from the Combine. Did not have the bench press workout, which we'll kind of touch on. But when you look at some of these athletic scores, man, because I want to put some of these into context here. You can see he ran a 4.65 40 with a 1.59 10-yard split. I think the 1.59 10-yard split is probably the most impressive thing everything there. So unique in this draft class that when you compare his 40 time directly to others, it was, in terms of the combine, because there wasn't a ton of guys that tested in, it was, I believe, the third lowest. But with that being said, it's not like it was a huge margin, and he's a lot bigger than like every linebacker in this class. On top of that, you start to go to the next scores here, and this is where things get really impressive. 37.5-inch vertical, which was the third best. You look at the 6.743 cone drill. That's unreal. That was the best in the class at the combine. That was better than Malcolm Rodriguez when Rodrigo came out. You look at the 4.24 20-yard shuttle time. That was the best in the class. It was better than Derek Barnes when Derek Barnes came out. So you're looking at those numbers for a guy that's that big. And the testing scores are unreal for this kind of player. The athlete is crazy. Now, in small letters there, you can see I kind of addressed some of the injury background here. It's not like he has a ton of red flags or something that was probably going to be brought up during the draft process. You do keep an eye on it. We know that Alex Anzalone had some shoulder issues when he came out. This is a player that's had to deal with that. You can see right shoulder in 2019, didn't miss any games. He was sick in 2020. 2022, he had knee surgery, which was right after the 2021 season. He didn't miss any time because he missed basically the spring because of that. It was something that he said he kind of had to get fixed. But then you also had the right shoulder UCL sprain, which he missed 0 games because of. But you also saw him wear a brace starting at like I think the end of the Minnesota game that popped up. And you saw that he didn't know bench press reps. So it's something to keep an eye on, I think, when you talk about specifically the shoulder. But I don't think there's like massive red flags here. He didn't miss like extensive time because of this kind of stuff. So it was really only like 3 games that he missed in there, and I believe was just a sickness. So for the most part, I think you're going to be good on that front. I mean, obviously the Lions had to check that out. The medicals much more than I just did right there, but just a little background. Then you look at some of the numbers. 83 tackles. These are according to PFF. 83 tackles on 12 missed tackles. He has a 9% missed tackle rate according to PFF. You can see the completion percentage allowed is pretty high. 39 receptions on 42 targets, but 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, only 236 yards, which is kind of crazy considering that many receptions. That's tied for 436th most. I believe he was their highest graded coverage linebacker as well. I could be wrong on that, but I believe he was. 19 coverage drops, that's top 10 in the country. 15 pressures, and what more specifically stands out there is the 21.7% pass rush win rate, which was nearly top 50 in the country. So you look at the numbers check out. He's only 22 years old. You're talking about a team captain here, very smart player. The size, the athleticism, he checks all of the boxes immediately in that sense, and then you start watching the player and it just feels like he's checking even more boxes. Let's start with the run game and some of the notes that I took there, and then we'll move on to the pass game as well and how he plays in those situations. Let's start with the run game first, though. I have a few more notes here, and like I said, once you start to roll through the traits, you get a lot of high grades. At least I did across like everything, so I can understand why a team would say, man, that's the most complete linebacker. Sure, not everybody's looking for that, but anybody that is looking for that, I can understand why you would love this guy. First part, kind of when you talk about the quarterback of the defense, for a player that's this young, obviously he's coming from Iowa, you know what kind of players you get defensively there. They have to work their way up, they have to earn it. Is the communicator that he is, the instincts, I'm sure you'll hear that word a lot, but you start with the communication on the field pre and post snap. He's the guy getting everybody lined up, and then post snap you also see the communication. That probably stands out even more to me because the on the fly communication, he almost looks like he's playing the game really slow, which is a good thing. Like the game seems to slow down for him. The way that he communicates as the play is rolling on reminds me of Alex Anzalone. He's a very good communicator as well. You'll see that if you watch the Lions, he's getting everybody aligned, doing all of those, the little things. Jack Campbell did that for Iowa, pre and post snap. Football intelligence that he brings. One of the notes that I had here was definitely stood out is the way that he protects against read options on short yardage situations. So again, we're talking about playing the run here. Consistently reads the mesh really well. He has great responses to that. But I also love the football intelligence in terms of understanding the situation. Knows where his run support is. He has a great feel on the field, where his support is, where he needs to attack, when a lane is full, and then he can kick out of it. Like, he's so good at just sensing those things. He adapts to pulling offensive linemen, counter pulls that will get thrown in, even if they're just false pulls up occasionally. You'll get tight end movement. Sometimes you get split zone looks. So the way that he's able to fill his gap, but also respond to those kind of and synchronize those two together without he's not just the kind of guy that you say, man, he's just plugging the gap, right? You just give him the B gap, go, get upfield. Like, the responses to those things is so natural, and the way that he feels instinctually, the quickness of it, but also on top of that with control and balance allows him to do that, where he's able to instinctively react to movement that he sees. And it's just so fluid the way it kind of all ties together when you watch him play. Early in the season, I thought they were playing him, in a little bit of a different style. All of a sudden you get to a game like Minnesota and you start to see see a little bit more aggressive. You start to see him asking more to attack the A gap. So you saw him versatility wise able to play a little bit differently between the tackles based on what they were asking of him defensively in that game. But he attacks with control downhill. Here's how I wrote it. He practically never gets stuffed into a gap without being able to kick out and flow to the ball. The fact that he seems to never be out of the play is crazy from that position. Now, it could be a little different in the NFL, and different schemes do affect this depending on what they're asking of you, but he's never out of the play. He attacks with great control. You'll see his ability to match the first step of a back and consistently be the first guy to put himself in a really good spot to fill his gap. And then you speak to, again, the football intelligence there. That's where it all ties back into play because he understands where everybody needs to be, but he also understands where he needs to be just from looking at the film aspect in terms of like, hey, there's movement, there's a shift pre-snap, okay, things have changed, responsibilities have changed, where do I need to be? And that's super consistent. He has a really good approach to that. He seems to never be out of the play and having an opportunity, even if the play's away from him, to be able to kick out, scrape through the line of scrimmage, and get back into the play. First step accuracy, the timing, those things all stand out when you watch him. Again, he makes the game look a little bit slower for him than I think it does for a lot of other players. Like those stops occasionally when he's just tackling someone behind the line of scrimmage. You had those in 2021 that would pop up when he's just lighting guys up behind the line because of the match of the first step, getting himself in a really good position. He doesn't overrun tackles. Like, I know I'm kind of going on a spree here of just saying good things, but these are all for kind of the same, FBI, when you talk about the communicator, the quarterback of the defense. Like, he doesn't overrun, zone schemes, wide zone schemes, Illinois, a lot of wide zone schemes there. He doesn't overrun those. He doesn't run himself out of the play. And then that transition to also tackling, which we'll get to, but it's just the understanding of his alignment, where he needs to fill. You'll see the efficiency based on his role. Here he is pressing the B gap. You can see that big nose tackle in there, which is something that the Lions drafted in Broderick Martin, which, sometimes you have to sit behind. But then when he has more responsibility of the A gap, you can see how he matches that first step. There's just little wasted movement, right? Here he is against Michigan. Now, there was no hold here, but you can see how there's just no wasted movement here pursuing the zone run. Now you continue to some of the taking on blocks. This is another area where I think naturally, it's how stout he is at the point of attack. Naturally, this is something that, he's pretty good at just because of his build. For example, tight ends, they just look like they're running into a brick wall sometimes. That's how I wrote it. There was an example at the second level, a tight end tried to go up there and block him, and I think he just hit him and then fell on the ground, and Jack Campbell just kept running. Like, he's big, right? This is a big dude. So that's why when you have someone that's that big and that athletic, it's kind of rare. A lot of guys come out now, they don't have the stack and shed. They're all dip around, that kind of thing. This guy legitimately has the ability to stack and shed, and a lot of it starts with the stoutness at the point of attack. He's very difficult for linemen to latch onto. Consistent inside hands when he's squared up with an offensive lineman. So even if it's not the immediate shed that you're looking for, the offensive linemen usually struggle to get a clean target on him. So now all of a sudden they're grabbing him. I think a couple holds may pop up in the NFL as well. I thought there was a couple times where you started to kind of see that because they'll have to get outside the frame to gain any sort of connection. That way they can try to maintain a little bit. Now, the arm length is not fantastic. The hand size is great when you talk about stacking and shedding and being able to grip and control the block. The arm length is not fantastic, and this is something that I think could definitely improve upon. Taking on blocks, proactiveness here, making sure that he's getting his hands on first. He could really help himself when you talk about some of the shedding side because his arm length does not stand out. You can see him occasionally look like he kind of gets swallowed up a little bit if he gets his hands on late or the target is not correct, and all of a sudden he gets himself in a tough spot where it takes a little bit too long to shed. Doesn't give up ground. Now, he does have to work for some leverage because he is naturally pretty tall. Not taller than most linemen, but linemen that really do well with getting underneath your pads and moving you. Those kind of guys, centers, guards, when he plays between the tackles inside the guards, that's something to be aware of, is that he has to consistently sink. Rarely you get occasions where he doesn't get a great leverage, and that can move him a little bit. More of it's from different situations, which I'll touch on. But for the most part, he just doesn't get moved. Like, yeah, they may get the first shot on him, and his shed may not be as immediate. Stack and shed may not be as clean as you would like. But he doesn't get moved out of the play. You're not getting him moved 5 yards back. So that's something that stands out. But I think he can be a little bit tall into contact, winning the leverage battle. This really, for me, pops up at the second level for multiple reasons. Sometimes I don't think he's always prepared for that. But it's more so almost shows up at the second level when the balance, when he's not squared up into the block and he's not able to sink his leverage immediately at the point of attack, that's when you can knock him back a little bit and give him some problems as he's trying to pursue the play. But for the most part, when you're talking about stepping in to a guard or a center, when you're talking about stepping inside there, he just doesn't give up ground. The shedding side of things, I think he's good in this category, but he definitely could be better. Obviously, some of the arm length can be a little bit of a knock to this, but I think for him, if he was a little bit more proactive in terms of, facing down blocks, being aware of that, tight ends can get him, guys that attack his side, that attack him on an angle, sometimes he doesn't get a really good square into contact, and then it makes it difficult for him to cleanly stack and shed. Even like tight ends occasionally would get him because he wouldn't get a really good placement there, and then all of a sudden, if he didn't get that, or his leverage on top of that wasn't great, occasionally you get him in spots where it would take a little bit longer for him to shed than you would expect. The reason I think he plays so fast because there's little wasted movement. You can tell he's not like thinking, he's just playing, and everything kind of happens with the flow for him. But with just good lateral bursts in a situation like this, again, he has to kind of work on that pad level, so you get a situation where you don't get that maybe elite twitch to sit, sink, and then be able to lock out to on an angle. Also shows up as a pass rusher when he's asked to blitz. You can see him kind of get slowed down sometimes when he doesn't really always use his hands as a pass rusher, and they can kind of reach out and just kind of snag him on the way by. It slows it up a little bit. But you saw it against a team like Michigan, where you just got him a tick late. He can kind of get swallowed up with some of the arm length that's just a little bit lacking there, and he attempts to sink into contact for leverage. Shows up at the second level, I think, more often than not. He presses the line with some bend when working up to fill a gap, but I think specifically when you either get him in pursuit, where maybe that pad level isn't low because he's not kind of sinking his way up to the line of scrimmage and pressing it, or you also get where he's not always the first one to get hands-on, that's when it kind of throws him off. I think you improve those two things, his shed ability takes another step. On the backside, when he starts to pop up a little bit, right, maybe he's not prepared directly for a block, he's not squared into that contact, and then at that point, you can make it a little bit more difficult for him to shed off. I think he could also be a little more creative in that sense. Now, I understand why he plays like he does, but I think at times there could be a little bit more creativity in terms of, okay, I'm in a position here where I could swim over this block, right? I could sidestep this block. Everything he does is usually the same approach, like the two-handed stab and shed. I think he could get a little bit creative at times with some opportunities that do present themselves to get a quicker shed than he does. I understand why he plays like he does. It can be very helpful between the tackles to hold his ground, but especially when the flow of the play starts happening, stretching outside to try to cut off a run, I think you could see some opportunities present themselves, and he could get a little bit more creative with how he wants to avoid that block rather than taking them all on the same way. So I think there could be a little creativity added to it as well. That's a heck of a transition into him as a blitzer. This is actually where I have the lowest grade on him. Now, that's not to say that he can't be impactful here. It's just where I have the lowest grade, kind of like Jahmyr Gibbs. My lowest grade is here. Where he wins as a blitzer right now, obviously his size is helpful. He wins in pursuit. Like, you know how all these years we sit there, we watch, we're like, man, they keep running by him, right? Our linebackers get pressure, they have a free rush, and no one blocks them. All of a sudden, they're right there, they're running towards the quarterback, and then they run right past him. And it's like, what the heck are we doing? Like, you're there, and then you run right past him. I don't think that issue is going to show up very often with Jack Campbell. Now, back to the last point that we made about block shedding, and we'll talk about it more as a finisher. He is a little stiff, I think, in terms of sinking, bending at the top of the, I don't want to say at the top of the rush, but when working into the backfield more often, if he's shooting a gap, sinking, that way he could really, bend down and make some of those outreached arm tackles. He's a little stiff there, so that does pop up a little bit as a blitzer as well, so you don't get that kind of like natural leverage in the blocks to, beat offensive linemen or create knockback and then bull rush out of it. Pursuit. Like the way that he's able to track down guys, he doesn't overrun tackles. He's very careful, I would say, into tackling attempts, but he just doesn't overrun them. Like, he'll have some misses, but they usually show up on if he launches just a little bit too early. But it's not the case of like, oh, he ran by that guy. He's so under control, it's crazy. Like, I don't know if I've seen a linebacker like that before. I really don't. The range is great, kind of warps into some of his tackles in pursuit, but he doesn't overrun any of the tackles. He never overruns the tackle. So that's where he'll show up and being able to finish as a pass rusher. He's pretty good at opening up crash lanes for defensive ends that want to wrap around inside, maybe do some sort of stunt. And if he wants to try to take the center out of the play or at least grab his direction, he does a good job of getting inside hand so he can attack and usually, be pretty intelligent and subtle about kind of hanging on to the lineman to allow the crash to come around and be successful. But that's where you get the most effectiveness. Outside of that, you're looking at a player that I don't think brings a ton as a blitzer. Now, you'll get some wins on running backs because he's just bigger than them, and especially if he gets his hands in their chest, he can push them back a little bit. But outside of that, a lot of running backs are usually much smaller than him, so it's kind of tough. But you don't get a lot of you don't get a lot of pass rush wins. This isn't the kind of guy that I'm lining up on the edge and being like, he's going to get some pass rush. Like, I don't see that being him. Now, I think in what we're going to do schematically, you don't need an elite pass rusher at linebacker. They don't need that as an off-ball linebacker, but you do like a guy that he plays through the running back a lot as a blitzer, which allows him to kind of, if the running back wants to try to sneak out or leak out of the backfield, he's not going to like hit the running back and run past, and all of a sudden the running back leaks out and he's got to try to find him and the guy's wide open. Very smart in that sense. He'll play the running back. That way, if the running back tries to leak out, he can basically just take him away because he's running into the running back. Now, this play clearly is not a pass rush, but I think it's just kind of the idea, and I have so many of these plays that I just kind of want to throw them in here. But this player, again, the recognition is so fast, he plays so fast that he's very quick to say, okay, my assignment's here, oh, it's a read, and then all of a sudden he gets to the quarterback. Like, there's no delay between him playing his run assignment, if it turns to a pass, and he's able to rush the passer to rush the passer. So you just get that kind of click and close for what they call for cornerbacks at the linebacker position. And I think this is just an example here, filling the A gap, wants to be aggressive on this play, get downhill, and he flashes that ability against Kentucky, just beats everybody to the spot. Like, this player is always around the football. He's not the flexible, sidestepping. Like, he doesn't bring a lot of ways to win as a pass rusher, or I should say as a blitzer. But I think it's definitely something that's going to be improvement in terms of if he's got a free lane, he's going to finish the play more often than I think we've had in the past. And on top of that, I think there's some intelligence there as a pass rusher as well. Tricks in the sleeve, up the sleeve of Jack Campbell to win as a pass rusher, which is understandable. Back some of the run defense, him in pursuit, which is kind of what I just hit on there. High energy player, takes good angles with really nice closing ability. I mean, you see the 40 time, which is pretty nice there. I like the way that he tackles as well. It's consistently low. He works through the thighs. He really limits any kind of leakage. It's either he's going to make the tackle or he's not. But if he's making the tackle, you usually don't get much after the tackle. He finishes plays consistently. He gets down in a lot of tackles late that aren't necessarily his, but again, it's that pursuit. He's like never out of the play. So you'll get him late into it to kind of clean things up, shut the run off there. But if it is his tackle, either it's like it's an immediate tackle or occasionally you may get a miss, but there's not much of it in between. If he gets his hands on you, you're going down. There's not a lot that's going to be created after the initial contact, so that's pretty awesome. But the angles keep him into plays really well because he's very smart about that, whether that's in straight pursuit in terms of don't overrun this tackle, but also getting himself back into the play with good angles. That way he can align himself and not, be in a position where it's like, oh, I didn't have enough real estate to get back into that kind of play. He's very light on his feet also, and I think this is something that, Brad Holmes was kind of touched on, but when you watch him between the tackles, very light on his toes. You get quick feet and allows him to reset, set his base, get into contact, control the blocks way better than a guy should at that size. You see the quick feet flash. Now, it's not something that's going to stand out to people, but I think it flashes. You see it against like Kentucky. I can remember exact play where you see the quick feet, his ability to kind of reset into his gap, sit down, and then get his block, and those quick feet really help him between the tackles. I think his burst is good, not elite, right? It's not something that's going to stand out. The first step isn't bad. There's some recovery burst there. But again, his game is based on FBI, communication, being in the right spot, being proactive as a run defender, rather than leaning on necessarily all the athleticism. The athleticism almost just feels kind of like a bonus for a guy that's that big. He plays with really good control into contact, as I kind of just touched on. He never overruns tackles, ever. He's very fluid in pursuit, so you'll have guys that are running away from him. They'll try to bring out the stutter step and change speeds, and he just matches everything. Now, one knock I will have there is there are times, there was a great example against Michigan, where I would like to see him be a little bit more of a striker. I think he's really smart in terms of understanding the situation, how to play different situations. Like I said about, a quarterback reads there, some of the mesh and understanding when that can be attacked, when we're in the red zone and coverage, understanding how to play it differently. But that was an example of there are a few instances that'll pop up where he can make that play right now and he's not the striker. Some of that is, again, he doesn't have that elite just immediate burst, but I think sometimes it's also not the style which he approaches. And that Michigan one really cost him because it was a 4th and 1. The tackle was there. That's one where you want to lean, take the risk over, let's make sure I get the tackle because they only need a yard. You talk about the loose hips, which we'll get into a little bit in coverage here. It really shows up as a run defender. You'll see it when he's breaking off of blocks, kind of that spin counter, how loose it is. Very good patience pressing the line of scrimmage, navigating trash. He's so good at this. I would say he's good to great in this category. Navigating trash for a guy that's that big, finding the football, playing his gap, not getting, locked into a run lane and then walled up, like just sifting through and navigating all the traffic. Impressive, especially on like the backside of a run when he's kind of playing his lane. You can see the run break off and just how fast he's able to read the mesh and then get himself in a position where he's all of a sudden pursuing. Like he just seems to be in every single play. Some of the past game stuff, this scenario where he was really good, he graded out really well, the numbers all back it up. I don't look at him as like, man, he's like the safety play and linebacker. Like he's not the coverage piece to me. He's not like the matchup piece, but he's good in the role that you put him in, especially what Iowa did with him. First off, you start off with zone coverage. I think you see a lot more of this, and you probably will at the NFL, but either way, zone coverage, his role that he played with Iowa is easily going to translate to what I think the scheme's going to be. I think we're going to see a lot of 4-2-5 next year, meaning that a lot of times your linebackers, they're not asked to travel too far, but they can play either middle of the field, or they'll play some of the hook curls, sometimes work into the flat area, right? You kind of play through that as a zone coverage backer. A guy like Alex Anzalone does this really well. He plays the deep middle, I think, even better probably than Jack Campbell would because he's just so fluid in turn and run. But Jack Campbell would easily translate because his skill set as a zone linebacker is a lot of what we ask, is a lot of what they did at Iowa as well. You see fast eyes in zone coverage when you're talking about working the hook curl area into the flat. Just very fast eyes. He affects those routes. He lets the tight end field on the way by or the inside slot. The route is a vertical stem. I'm passing it off to the next level. That's a lot of what we did last year. We saw that, right? If the route broke vertical, we'd pass it off to the next level. Safety takes it, whoever that may be. It allows you to play some off coverage. You get split coverage looks in the back end of that 4-2-5, right? Half the field may be in a cover 2 kind of look. The other half may be in cover 4, meaning cover 6. But you get those types of things. So you need guys that can do both. And he's that guy that reads it so fast, communication and just passing off routes, and it just looks with ease. I go back to the communicator aspect. Like this was something that I was like, there's no way he just saw that, but it's just so smooth. It's like, okay, this guy's here, you go down there, and he's directing traffic as the play is happening, and he's positioning himself to make a play in coverage. But those fast eyes from the inside slot or the tight end into kind of the next level, which would be kind of like your flat area, very smooth, very efficient as well. Doesn't get bullied at the point of attack by tight ends, which some smaller linebackers could. Now, this is man and zone, right? If a guy's trying to spot, if they're trying to hit a spot route in the zone, maybe they use the contact, kind of lean into you. Michael Mayer uses his size really well. And that's not just size because he's also an aggressive player, but he doesn't get bullied. He lets you feel contact along the way. Look at our linebacker core. You saw last year, right? Lions had a lot of different pieces for different situations. Chris Board would come in for third downs and just play tight end sometimes. This is a guy that's not going to be bullied in those spots, right? He has the build, obviously, to match up with like every tight end. And athletically speaking, against most of your typical, specifically inline tight ends, he's going to be just as athletic, if not more athletic than that tight end that he's going to be matched up with. Very proactive angles in man and zone. This is something that I think I have to harp on as well. He's, again, just that's the kind of player he is. And that's the FBI. It's being ahead of everything. Very proactive. Inside crossers, right, from slots or tight ends. And if you're playing that, middle field zone coverage underneath, maybe it's a cover 2, right? And you're just playing underneath zone. It's the proactiveness to see the route and then step in front of it. Not step towards it, but step in front of it, cut it off, make himself faster than he is. That way he can proactively set himself in a position where the guy can't run away from him because he's just faster. So you get those kind of sets from him. You'll get into man, right? If a tight end runs a stick or if they run a quick out route and he's got that guy and he's playing inside leverage, you'll see the way that he squeezes the route, but as soon as he starts to sense it, there's occasions where you'll see him undercut. I didn't see this enough, but there was an example I saw him undercut one of these out routes and he forced the ball to go high and it was an incomplete pass. Like, that's the kind of thing that Brian Branch does, and he's doing that as a linebacker, but he positions himself really early. There's no delay. That's the bit. There's no delay. There's no pause. There's no like, hey, I got the underneath zone. Okay, he's vertical. Okay, I'm gonna give it to you. Now I gotta take him. I got a deep middle zone. Like, there's no delay. There's no processing time. It's all just fluid. It's like, here, you got that. I got this. I'm going here. It's like, there's no thinking to it, and he's playing fast, and you have to do that for a guy that's not running a 4.3 40, right? You have to play fast. He plays so fast in coverage because there's just no delay when communicating in zone coverage. I think he has impressive body control. I wrote it down over and over and over. I know it seems weird with a guy this big. You wouldn't expect that. I wrote down multiple times impressive body control. Multiple aspects of his game, I wrote that down, and I think it's huge in coverage because he's so impressive. You saw it in the Ohio State interception, right? He's not the twitchiest athlete, right? It's not the most burst when you're talking about laterally side to side coming out of breaks, but He has really good body control. He plays within himself. I say a lot with linemen, but he does that. He doesn't get in a position. You don't see him falling on the ground very often. Watch Jack Campbell. Tell me how times you see him fall on the ground in coverage. It just doesn't happen. He plays with fantastic body control, movement skills, because he's understanding how he plays the game. But it's also very fluid, very balanced. He doesn't, overdo it. And I think some of that's also the role that you're going to put him in. You can't put him in certain spots and feel really good about it. Like, I wouldn't leave him in the slot and be like, hey, put him in the slot. I wouldn't leave him there. You can do it. I wouldn't leave him there, though. But middle field, you see the fluidity and the body control, and he has just a really good sense for that. I don't think he creates depth as easy as a guy like Alex Anzalone can. Alec flips, turns, and runs, and it's so darn smooth. I don't think it's that smooth. It's not that fluid. It's not that tight. It's not that crisp. But that's understandable for a guy that's that much bigger than Alex Anzalone is, which is why I think this combination is going to be pretty awesome to see these guys play together. I think he's got plus lateral movement, which means it's not elite, but I think it's plus. Like, he has some lateral movement skills. You see the side-to-side shuffle that he brings out there, specifically when working, middle field zone or working into the hook curl area. He doesn't get aggressive in jump routes enough, though. I gave you that one example where he kind of undercut the route. I would like to see a little bit more of this, where it's a little bit more anticipation. Maybe you're anticipating he's going to break out and you kind of undercut. Maybe just give me a little bit more anticipation, right? This isn't the twitchiest athlete, so he may have to be a little bit more anticipation heavy if he's going to be a guy that makes more plays on the football and coverage. Now, I love the way that he plays it at the catch point. He instinctively plays through the hands. Even if the ball doesn't get thrown, he's playing the hands at the break point, right? And he has a really good sense for not overrunning breaks and, again, playing to his skill set, because if he's trying to, be a guy that wants to jump everything, but he guesses wrong, he doesn't have the skill set to naturally just flip and get back in position and make it look easy. That's not him. So he has to play within himself. So it's understandable, but he hasn't been like an elite, like, oh, you're getting like tons of interceptions because he's jumping routes. That's not how his interceptions came about. I saw 3 of his 4 interceptions. I think he had 4 in the last 2 years. 3 of his 4 interceptions, I watched them, and they weren't interceptions of him jumping routes. They were interceptions of the ball was off the tip, concentration, body control, as I just touched to. Great interceptions, but he wasn't jumping routes necessarily. One of them was a bad pass in the end zone, I believe, but the point is, it was also recognition there as well. Give him credit to that, but that's not the kind of linebacker that you're going to get. But again, in a 4-2-5, that's what we play a lot of. And you want to have, you talk about raising the floor of the team. 2 linebackers. If he and Alex are out there and you got 5 DBs, the DBs are responsible for a lot more of the coverage playmaking. You got to have smart communicators back end. That's what we're full with. Will Harris, Brian Branch, Cam Sutton. I mean, we're full with that in the back end. But now you have that at the second level with Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell. I know this off top, but I can't explain how excited I am to see these guys play together, because I just think when you watch Alex, he plays the game really fast. He's always trying to line people up. He's trying to communicate. Last year, you saw the rotations. The Lions would have to change up alignments based on who was in the game. How they would play out there with Malcolm versus how they had to put Derek Barnes out there. The Lions had a little bit of a turnstile last year in terms of their off-ball inside linebackers when they wanted to play 2 linebackers. So you had a different mix where Malcolm, great instincts, but not the same middle field impact. A lot of that due to his size. Derek Barnes, the instincts weren't as great there. He's got a little bit more size. So the Lions would rotate. When he got to goal line, here comes Derek Barnes into the game. Chris Board was specifically just to play third downs. So you're talking about having to rotate through different linebackers for different things. This player raised the floor. He can play with Malcolm. He can play with Barnes. But at the same time, you're raising the floor in terms of now you're not having to rotate pieces in, and yet you're still getting the same impact. There's no delay, so you're getting those kind of instincts, but you're also getting the size that a guy like Derek Barnes brings to have the impact to free up Alex Anzalone, but allow them to play together. If you have a guy like this, I believe now it's going to be a transition because it's the NFL, but if he could just step in and get it, which I think he can, all of a sudden you're looking at it like 2 guys that are really smart. You're not going to have breakdowns, which we occasionally had, from the second level to the back end. And you have one of the smartest defenses, I think, in football. It's what the Saints are about. Switching everything. Linebacker has it. Pass to the safety. Okay, now I got the hook curl. But there can't be delay. Demonstrated excellent fluidity and concentration on the interceptions. Very fluid, a very good balance, but also on top of that, just great concentration. Like, those interceptions weren't easy. Like the one off the tip where he's like bobbling that, the Ohio State one, like that wasn't just, oh, that's right in his hands. Like, he didn't just throw it right at him. He had to work for that. And you talk about a linebacker here. He had to work for that. And that was really good. The game slowed down to him. He's got big mitts, too. I think that's a part of it, right? You have a guy like, he's got like he's got much bigger hands than like Melvin Rodriguez, for example. He's got big hands. So I think that's part of it, that when you have big hands, you can kind of just pluck that football. I think that's absolutely part of it. But speaking of that, he has a middle field presence. So when you're talking about the role, middle field drops in zone coverage, there's a presence. I think it really makes itself felt in goal line situations because there's only 5-10 yards to the end zone, and you're talking about a guy that is that tall, that has a 37.5 inch vertical. Like, there's multiple plays where you'll see him jump up and it's like, yeah, that receiver can't see the football. There's no way he can see that. And because he's so fast to react to things, you're getting him consistently being in the way. So he has a real legitimate middle field presence, which could really show up, I think, in goal line situations because it's difficult. Everybody wants to, tack the tight ends back, the ends, and that kind of thing. He's got a presence there. You may not want him to man up consistently, but if you have him just sitting zone, and a lot of times goal line man, that's what it is, right? Everybody's kind of manned up, but if nothing happens, everybody kind of just stands at the line. He's got a legitimate presence over the middle of the field. They need to be a little bit more proactive, I think, as a run defender and coverage guy from a slot alignment. When they kick him outside of the box and they have him aligned from the slot pre-snap and they work pro-snap, I think he may have to be a little more proactive in the NFL, a little more anticipation based on the situation. I think there was one on Minnesota where it was like they needed a yard, so I understood why he stood his alignment, right? It could have been a quick screen, so he had to be ready for that. But at the same time, he got to the tackles just a tick late. That may be a situation where you have to be just a little bit more like, I'm just going to kind of take my shot here because of the situation, because I don't think he has that elite burst or twitch in the lower body to necessarily be a guy that can kind of just let everything happen. Sometimes you would get seams that would get behind him as well because the reactions were just like, they were natural, but again, he's not the elite like twitch, oh, I'm back there, I'm in your face, like he's not that, so you could get passes over his head. Man coverage, this is an area where I'm going to be really intrigued to see how the Lions use him. I think he'll really struggle matching multiple route breaks, specifically from running backs. Tight ends may be a different story. He didn't do it a ton. Tight ends may be different. Running backs, I could see him having real issues here. There was a couple flashes of it. You put him in man coverage on running back, it's fine. He does a really good job of playing within himself, understanding angles, cutting it off, kind of letting it happen and then finishing the play, right? He's got really decent straight line speed, so he can close. The issue becomes if he's trying to match an angle route. That's where you start to see problems. And it's not because he's fallen over and stuff. Like, even the play he got beat, it was like there's some fluidity there. The issue is that for him to be that tall versus a 5'9", 5'10" running back, follow the break, right, where the running back's already faster than him, sink, change directions, and match it, that's something that he's going to have a problem with, I think, at the NFL. So you're going to have to be aware. He can match running backs, but I think your best bet there is if it's 3rd and 10, you put him on a running back, he kind of plays off, plays a little bit closer to the sticks, and he just kind of stays on top of it, crashes down, finishes the play. Rather than asking him to get in his hip and stick with him, you're going to have some issues right there. So I don't think he's like the matchup piece. He's not the guy. It's like, put him on anybody. I think if he's honestly more of that. Now, tight ends, very curious because I think his size, the movement skills, the demeanor, and the understanding of just attacking through the hands, if you put him straight up on a tight end, which they didn't do a ton, they didn't just match him across the tight end and say, go cover him. He would usually do it from an inside linebacker role with inside leverage, and if the stem broke out, he would obviously try to undercut it. But if you put him on directly a tight end, certain inline tight ends, I think he would actually be able to hold his own really well, and he would take that away. Now, Iowa did a lot of double teaming on tight ends. They would put both linebackers on him and just take him out of the play. I think they did it against Ohio State, and they gave him a touchdown. Not every tight end. Like, I wouldn't put him on Kyle Pitts, but I could put him on an inline tight end. I could put him on Brock Wright. Like, I would feel pretty good about him being able to match that, even though Alex Anzalone may be my preferred option either way in those situations if I had the choice. His body control and change of direction stand out, but the sink and explosion just isn't great for matching routes specifically. He's got plus straight line speed, as I said. Also kind of susceptible in man coverage, especially if you align him there pre-snap, to being set up for pick routes. Teams do this. They took advantage of it one time as an OPI. But, for example, if you had him matched up on a running back, right, or even a slot, sometimes that happens. You put him on a slot, and maybe it's not he has the full route tree. Again, if it gets upfield, he may let it go. But if it stays underneath, they would run pick routes with him. And he's just a big dude. So you don't have that feel to kind of get skinny without like kind of running into his own corner. So they could set him up on pick routes and almost take his own player out of the play because he struggled to kind of, and he did his best. It wasn't like ugly, but he's just a big dude. So for his ability to kind of get skinny when they're trying to switch and not necessarily pass off the routes because that's not what they want him to do. They have him just sticking when they're doing that and he's underneath because he's just playing the underneath route. when he's trying to trail with it and stay with his guy and the other guy comes across, you get him running into guys because he doesn't have the ability to get skinny and kind of work his way through. But either way, I think his coverage is really good. You just have to understand where you use him in. I think it's an immediate fit because either I can play him in a middle field zone where he has a presence. I don't think he's going to get depth as easily as a guy like Alex Anzalone does. Like, Alex Anzalone plays fast. People don't realize it. This guy has to cover slots from that spot sometimes. He can do it, and you saw it last year against Green Bay. That's going to be a little bit more, I think, inefficient at the next level. From the slot work, communication heavy, working middle of the field. He works inside crosses really well. You can work him from the hook zone area into some of the flat, so he could try to take that away with high level communication. Man coverage, I'd be intrigued on certain matchups on tight ends. Running backs, if you kind of have him play off, and if he's just working flats or single breaks, he'll be fine. But if he's doing multi breaks and you're asking him to match that, you may run into some trouble there. So again, he's really good within his own role. Don't let me discredit that, but I don't think his role is the deepest role for every linebacker. But like I said, across the board for me, I gave him good grades. My lowest grade is as a blitzer, and that's not one of the key traits anyways for what we're going to ask him to do. It's just my lowest grade for him. My highest grade is his football intelligence. He plays the game pretty fast for a guy that's that big. His coverage is a plus. I think the next best trait I gave him was his ability to navigate, run the defense. Like, this is a player that I think across the board just doesn't really have many weaknesses. They say he's a high floor player for a reason. You put him in the right defense, and all of a sudden, when you talk about raising the floor of the team, he does that. Because if you want to rock two linebackers, like last year, Lions rotated Malcolm in. Remember, they drafted Barnes. He said, you're going to be our Mike. Then they signed Alex. They got Dibbo same offseason. Derek never really became the Mike, so that was kind of Alex. But based on who was on the field, they changed responsibilities between Derek and Malcolm. They played different roles when they were both on the field. For the Lions, who, our linebackers are, I think, going to be, we'll see, it's kind of far out, but I think we're going to ask our linebackers to protect a little bit of protect the A and B gap, meaning, for example, if you're in like a 4-2-5, but you're playing a little bit more of the overside, meaning you have your 3-tech on the strong side of the formation, so he's taking the B gap, besides a slant or something, that role could be changed. But naturally, if he has the B gap, then all of a sudden, as a linebacker, you have to play the A gap on that side, and the backside would have to play the B gap because we play 2I and a 3 or a 1 and a 3. But then there's the flip to that. So I think you're talking about a guy that's probably going to get a lot of that. You're going to lean on more DBs and D-line because, as Aaron Glenn said, that's what he feels like, the defense is built through the defensive backs and also through defensive linemen. I believe that. And I know this pick may be like, why then draft a linebacker? Well, you're getting a ridiculously good communicator. I don't think you're going to have many breakdowns. You're getting a 3-down talented linebacker here. Now, I still think if he's kind of the matchup piece, if I get Kyle Pitts, I don't want Campbell on him. I don't want Anzalone on him. I want Iffy on that guy. I don't want those two on. I want someone else in that matchup, I'm saying. But for a lot of two linebackers, which I could see as running, and then kind of the fifth guy could rotate in as the James Houston, the Charles Harris. Two linebackers, you're raising the floor there. And the responsibility is going to be, number one, stop the run, which statistically we've been pretty horrible at these last 2 years. Now, I feel like a lot of that was some of the defensive backs. It's all levels. It's not just one level. But we have our nose tackle now in Broderick Martin, who's 330 pounds. He'll handle the A-gap most of the time. Aleem McNeil, I believe, is going to stick at the 3-tech, right? So we have both of those. These linebackers are going to be asked to handle the A and B gaps, which means being able to take on offensive linemen is a very helpful part of that because then you can throw less bodies. You have 6 linemen. You have 6 front 6 guys within a 4-2-5, right? So if that's a 5th defensive back, you should be able to fill every gap with that because you have a C gap, B gap, A gap, A gap, B gap, C gap. You should be able to fill every gap with those 6 players, which means that you're going to have to ask them to be able to play their gap. And Jack Campbell gives something different that I don't know if Alex Anzalone's actually ever had. A guy with that kind of size, that's that good at taking on blocks, with that kind of stoutness, that kind of FBI. I don't know if he's ever played alongside of that. I think he's going to help open up Alex a little bit more. Honestly, bring it back to a little bit more of the Thor. Now, Alex has to take on blocks as well, right? Malcolm can do it. He's just not the prototypical build. He's going to have to still be able to take on blocks, but Alex is not someone that, he's like specializes in an area. This is a guy that legitimately, if you look at this draft class and you run a lot of 2 off-ball inside linebackers, this is the guy that legitimately is just built to do that. That's who he is. I think we'll see the mix between him playing Mike linebacker and Sam linebacker, because in a 4-2-5 they call it a Sam to the strong side. I think we'll see the mix of that, but the positive will be you won't have to change alignments just based on who's out there with Alex Anzalone. I think it's going to help really free up Alex, which is going to be really overlooked. Alex is going to play fast, be a coverage guy that we like, and be more of just a thumper, be more attacking, because this will be the guy, I think, as much as he can get downhill and aggressive, I like him the best as a guy that navigates, not the immediate jump into a gap, maybe a little bit more control there, pursuing the play. And Alex gets a little bit more of a downhill play style to him. You can kind of offset those depending on your alignment. I really like that. I think it's going to open up Alex. He's going to play even faster, not going to be thinking as much. Jack Campbell will be able to take on some of those responsibilities, but Jack's built for that. Right? You drafted Barnes saying he's going to be the Mike. He's going to be that guy. Never really came that starter for us. That was always Alex who was like, hey, he's the green dot. He's the guy that runs everything. Well, now you have Jack Campbell to be that. And I think he can be that, which could open up, if you wanted to, I think Alex Anzalone to play a little more free than he's been able to play with us. Still, flip side of that, though, they're going to both be on the field at the same time. They could both be out there for all 3 downs. He's just going to bring something that the Lions don't have and not a lot of teams even have in the NFL anymore. Jack Campbell's an absolute animal. He's young. He's the exact type. He looks like a linebacker. The way he dresses, the way he talks, the way he acts, he's a linebacker. And don't think this is necessarily the end for a guy like Malcolm Rodriguez. I don't believe that. I think, first off, these two guys can play together. The competition is going to be real, but it gives us something to a unit that we really don't have. On top of that, this dude's clutch. I know I'm throwing this in here really late, but I was watching this Minnesota game. First off, forced fumble, 1 drive, it's 10-10. Comes back, gets the interception, and almost takes it back if he didn't step out of bounds. There's also the clutch element to this player that needs to be recognized. So I'm super excited to see what this looks like with Alex Anzalone. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Pat, for watching, and I'm out.